Hello, everybody. We're getting ready to start the webinar. This is Hyana Park from SpyPond Partners. Welcome to Webinar 25 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series sponsored by Federal Highways and AASHTO. The topic of today's webinar is TAM Communications. Our next webinar is on Wednesday, May 10th at 2 p.m. and this is going to be the first in a four-part series where we're going to share progress that agencies are making in development of their MAP 21/FAST compliant transportation asset management plans. And our first one is going to focus on asset inventory, condition, target setting, and 10-year projections. So kind of looking at the work and a sample set of states are doing under this topic area. So now, before I turn it over to Max Scrogg of Federal Highway for a brief introduction of today's topic, I just want to highlight some communication resources that are available. The AASHTO Communicating Performance website, and you can see that on the top with a URL. And that actually, I use that site to help identify some of the speakers for today's webinar. And we also have up a recently published document called the AASHTO Communication Guide for State DOTs. So I urge you guys to check that out. So with that, and just for everyone on the call, all the slides are available for download and will be up on the TAM portal as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Max.
Thanks. My name is Max Scrogg, and I'm with Federal Highways Office of Asset Management, Pavements and Construction. And Federal Highways, in cooperation with the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management, is very pleased to sponsor this webinar series that I was just explaining some of the future stuff coming on with that. But these webinars are a great way to bring people together around a series of topics and to connect with people in the asset management community. So on our agenda today, we're going to hear 5 perspectives on TAM Communications. So it's a full agenda and we want to get into it. I've just got a couple of remarks I want to make. So if you want to go to the next slide. As all of you know today, asset management is a very multidisciplinary process. It's achieving coordination across the agency requires strong communications, and also there's a lot of outside stakeholders that agencies need to communicate with. So we have to deal with both internal and external communications in that regard. So today we're going to talk about and encourage the use of some tools and some resources for strengthening that communication about your transportation asset management. So I also would encourage you to visit Federal Highways Asset Management webpage, and you'll see the URL there at the bottom of the slide. There are some resources that are available. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Yane and from SpyPond and let her talk about the learning objectives for today, as well as our agenda, and introduce her speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Max. Today's presentation includes 5 perspectives on TAM Communications. Each of our presenters has helped to advance the state of the practice. We'll hear about the process of strengthening agency communications capabilities and practices. We'll learn about the contribution of strong communications to an overall TAM program. Presentations will highlight both successful approaches and some important lessons learned. Now, for this webinar, our primary learning objectives are to building working knowledge of key concepts and definitions relevant to TAM communications, understanding the specific approaches to innovative communications efforts, and beginning to apply this knowledge in order to answer how can agencies apply strong communications practices in their TAM plans and programs. What benefits can states expect by working to strengthen TAM communications? And what are the key lessons learned for agencies seeking to enhance the reach and impact of their TAM programs through better communications. And of course, all of these webinars are intended to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge. So we have a full agenda today, so I'm going to make a few comments before handing it over to Andrew Williams, our first presenter. We will have Q&As at the end, so please submit your comments or questions using the webinar's Q&A feature, which is on the menu bar on your screen. So anytime during the presentations, as you think of them, please enter them in. And for those of you connecting from your desktop computer, you can download the slides now from the webinar's handouts control panel, and we'll make all of the slides and the video available after today's webinar on the tam-portal.com. And one final note for our presenters: in order to keep things moving along on schedule, I will chime in and remind you when you have 2 minutes remaining in your allotted time. So our first speaker today is Andrew Williams of Ohio DOT. Andrew is the administrator of the Office of Technical Services at Ohio Department of Transportation, responsible for infrastructure management, overseeing various operations such as geographic information systems, highway performance monitoring systems, traffic monitoring, and asset management. Andrew has over 15 years of experience in the area of asset management and transportation systems development. Now I'm going to turn it over to Andrew.
And Andrew, if you just go up to display settings and swap the displays there, we'll be looking at the slideshow. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayana and Perry. Very pleased to be able to present this afternoon. Know a lot of the folks out there doing the asset management initiatives across the country, and a great opportunity to be able to share with you again. Let's talk asset management plans and communication. ODOT has taken a strategic direction that I'm very excited about. We're in our third cycle now of our new asset management plan implementation. One of the critical components of that asset management plan is communication. And here's why. We are estimating that we have about $115 billion worth of assets. 90 billion, which is comprised of pavement, bridges, and culverts. And then we're estimating that we have another 25 billion in other. And with that kind of responsibility, you're going to get a lot of questions in terms of what it is that you're doing. What is this transportation asset management plan initiative that is so important to the Department of Transportation? So we tie that to the estimated value of our assets that are out there in the system that we're actually managing. Another key component to what we're doing with our asset management communication is that we're branding certain things, one of which is we have a statistic that basically tells that we have that 93% of our time and resources is geared toward taking care of what we have. For a lot of our traveling public, a lot of people that we deal with, they think that we're just always building new stuff, and that's not the case at all. So again, part of the communication strategy is what are those statistics, or what are those metrics that we want to brand into our communication plan so that it's consistent all throughout the agency, internal, and then also our external stakeholders. To bring this about, just like much of you, we have an asset management leadership team where a lot of you may have steering committees and advisory committees. We have an asset management leadership team. We call them the AMLT. And this pyramid kind of illustrates what that looks like. At the very bottom of the pyramid, we have our asset management leadership team. It's comprised of central office and district stakeholders. These are folks who are geared toward doing the day-to-day. These are the folks that's very critical that communication both from the top goes down to them so they can get it all the way down to the frontline troops and our highway technicians. We use our deputy directors for concurrence, and then we go to our executive management for final approval. But with that, we have certain subcommittees, one of which is a communications group, an infrastructure group, a TAM audit group, which is a truly valuable group that I won't talk about today, but they're the ones that do all the vetting of asset inventories, and a data governance group. But our communications group, the reason why we came up with this particular group is no communication plan lives unless there's an owner. And we wanted to make sure that we had ownership over the plan. So how do we do this? And I feel like we've been very effective in working this out. We came up with a message mapping. We utilize this tool, which is a collaboration within the communications group. We identify who are the key stakeholders, both internal and external, because at those different levels, there's a different message. Keep in mind, again, for most folks, things like payment management systems and lower cost treatments and things like that, it's just not intuitive to a lot of folks on the public side, but they're also not very intuitive to the folks on the internal side also as well. When you start talking about working on roadways that are not really bad in lieu of roadways that are in pretty bad shape. So we use this particular template here to kind of vet through who are the key people that we're trying to get to, and they're at all different levels. And so we've identified them as internal ODOT folks, our own leadership, all the way down to our frontline people in the district, our external customers such as MPOs, county engineers, municipal managers, our legislature, political types, they have a different message. The industry leaders, we brought about preservation treatments, low-cost preservation treatments. Well, that communication main point is that, hey, we're going to need them to gear up to do some of these different types of treatments like micros and things like that they haven't been geared up before. And we need to have the feedback from them in order to make that work, so we're not just hitting them all at one time. And then the general public. What happens when we drop a chip seal in front of a house that never received a chip seal before? So we have different things in our toolkit to address these main points for each one of these customers here. We state our goal, our initiative, but what we're trying to get to is the what, the why, the when, and the overall impact. And then we include all of these different things in our toolkit. Our toolkit is comprised of fact cards, and we have an example of one here to the right that basically just talks about what we're doing, keeps the message consistent throughout the entire agency, so that when we're engaging the public at any one of our levels internally, we'll have the same message. We have a website that's under a lot of revamping right now. We have a website that they can go to and get information. We have an animated video that basically has been very valuable to us in terms of going to different trade shows, conferences, and opening that up, allowing people to understand really what we're doing. We have presentation material. So our strategy map that I just showed you, we will know what kind of presentation should go to the different stakeholders at their particular level. If you're dealing with folks that are out on the local side, that presentation won't be the same as the one I may give to the legislature. We have district meetings. We have 12 districts in the state of Ohio. We want to make sure that we get that consistent message all the way through. And so in their district meetings, we give them a kit. Each deputy director of each district has a kit so that the message is all the same, terminology is the same. We're also utilizing trade shows, construction kickoff, and professional events to ensure that we're getting the message out with the different materials. And then we have a communication plan that speaks to how you're supposed to use all the different tools in the toolkit. Better data makes better decisions. We're also utilizing our Transportation Information Mapping System, TAM, and we've programmed in all the different dashboard metrics so that folks can actually see visually what we're doing in terms of the impact and the benefit that we're getting from the asset management initiative. It is very critical, again, that there is ownership over the communication plan. We have ownership over each one of the components of our transportation asset management plan, and the communication plan is no different. And also what we try to do is tie people who are experts at doing these things to these particular initiatives. So for example, our communications department oversees this communication part of our asset management plan with our PIOs, our public address folks in the districts, to make sure the messaging is clear all the way through. This allows for a better collaboration, but also allows for us to align ourselves a little bit better with the public in terms of their expectations, also aligning ourselves with the industry folks, making sure that they can handle the strategic direction that we're going to go. And again, these are just some of the types of graphics and things that we're displaying that folks are actually taking with them. The other neat thing about this, utilizing our transportation information mapping system, is that this is public facing, but it also is mobile. So if you're at a meeting, you're able to pull up some of these same maps and dashboards on the fly at your meeting that you can actually share with folks that are out there. So I know that was a quick fly through, but I wanted to make sure that I honed in on some very important items, one of which is connecting your communication plan to your transportation asset management plan, but ensuring that you've got ownership so that you can continually keep this updated. We're also getting ready to put in a survey to benchmark where we're at right now in terms of the awareness of the Transportation Asset Management Initiative internally. So we'll come back 2 years from now and see how we're actually trending. This has been a very vital tool for us, and we fully intend to keep it going and keep it alive. And that's all I have for today.
Thank you, Andrew. Our next presentation today is from Dave Salsrud. Dave is a 33-year employee of Minnesota DOT. He's a professional engineer who has served in highway design and project development roles with approximately 18 years as a district manager of maintenance and construction operations. He leads a team of experts implementing numerous asset management improvement initiatives and also chairs MnDOT's Asset Management Steering Committee, which sets priorities and direction for the department's asset management activities. And now I'll turn it over to Dave.
And Dave will also ask that you go up to the display setting and swap the order of the displays. And then we should be good to go.
All right, how's that look? Can you hear me?
Looks great. Yep,
okay.
Looks great.
All right, thanks. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for the introduction. I must say that I'm rather humbled by the opportunity to speak to your group. I'm a relative newcomer to the whole asset management discipline here, but we're pedaling as fast as we can here at MnDOT. So I'm happy to share some of the work we've been doing recently. And while Andrew gave a wonderful introduction on the need for communications, my presentation gets maybe a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of kind of how we've attempted some of those things here at MnDOT. So the first, here's an outline for what I want to talk about, a little bit about external communications, and then just a little bit on internal communications, some of the initiatives that we've taken here recently in the department. First, I'll talk a bit about, if you happen to know Mark Nelson of our planning department in Minnesota. His folks are responsible for developing long-range plans, capital investment plans, and as well as initially the asset management plan. And I'm really representing the work that he and his folks have done in the first handful of slides here, and what I feel was just some really effective and novel approaches to communicating with stakeholders and the public. So one of the themes here, for us, I think, is that good communications are really two-way communications. So a lot of what we attempt to do with the communication strategy is to provide a forum for folks to have input into the decisions that we make, as well as understand some of the background behind decisions. And that's both internal and external, and hopefully you'll see that throughout my discussion here. So a couple of engagement principles for the external communications with regard to the planning, really meeting people where they are, trying to, things have changed over the years from my point of view in terms of both demographics, technologies, sources where people get their information, and just having, public hearings like we did a long time ago is just not an effective means either communicating or really hearing from the wide variety of stakeholders. So, so that's a theme, is trying to meet folks where they are, but also maintaining some of the traditional approaches, recognizing that there's still a significant population that we serve out there that are able to connect with us through the traditional approaches. So, in terms of the planning efforts that they have recently undertaken, I guess, a handful of different methods that I'll speak to. Some of the traditional methods listed here, for example, stakeholder forums. The effort that they undertook was to bring basically large groups of stakeholders together in person. I think they probably had 3 or 4 regional locations where these large meetings were held, and the effort was to get diverse groups of local jurisdictions, for example, cities, counties, RDCs, MPOs together for maybe a half day or a whole day with formal presentations and discussion. I think over the course of the planning process here, 7 of those were held. Another strategy, stakeholder briefings. Those consisted more of appearing on the agenda of local jurisdictional bodies, city councils, county boards, that sort of thing, as a part of more abbreviated presentations and discussions with bodies like that. One of the more novel and effective, I think, tools for two-way communications was a booth that they held at our Minnesota State Fair. Comment and survey cards available. I know we staffed that thing for, I think it's about 10 days long. Most people felt that was a really good and effective experience. Public events, that's another thing that I felt was really a novel way of trying to get together with folks, where they would look literally for public events that were going on and appear at festivals or craft fairs, parades sometimes. One of them was a pub crawl that took place in Minneapolis, St. Paul here. I know they told me they did all this work outside of the pub. I'm pretty sure I can believe on that. But generally, the effort was to have iPads in those venues so that people could take surveys in real time. Another effort using social media to both advertise web locations where surveys could be taken. Also felt that Facebook, with a feed to Facebook, could really target messages to demographics or gender, age, location, zip codes, people with preferred languages other than English, for example. So that was felt to be a pretty effective way of getting to groups that are traditionally not as able to participate in some of the more traditional stakeholder input forums. So also workplaces. I was told that we had a consultant that spent several months just basically cold calling businesses to see if they would allow us to set up a booth or to have a lunch brown bag forums like that again allowed MnDOT to go to its stakeholders rather than the converse. So, and then finally, the word ECHO there, it is a portion of our Twin Cities public TV station that specializes in reaching out to non-English speaking communities, and they literally took materials we had, translated them into various languages, made invitations, booked and attended events, doing translations at the events, and actually made the presentations that we would have made in English-speaking venues. So among Somali and Spanish-speaking were the primary audiences for those efforts. So it's just a smattering of efforts methods that we employ to try and get, again, the two-way dialogue going with our stakeholders. So this slide provides a little bit of information, I think. gave us some ability to judge how successful we were in terms of the demographics and the folks that that we're able to get in touch with. So race and ethnicity, you may see, age, and if you want to look over these things in the slide or the presentation as it's posted, you'll certainly have that opportunity. Moving on, this is part of the effort included an analysis of some of the costs and the basically the results that we felt we received as a part of the effort. Each of the efforts that I mentioned has a slide similar to this with the number of responses and costs therefore. This is a breakdown of just representative individual forums, for example, and the kind of a benefit cost, if you could look at it that way. A feedback unit was basically considered to be if we got like a completed survey or a comment card, something written down, more than just a verbal comment. So you can see quite a range in terms of cost on that. With that measure as a basis, the darker bars indicate the more traditional means, and then of course the lighter colored blue are some of the more novel methods they employed. So this is just a kind of a sample of what folks were presented, different investment scenarios and requests that they would express, their vision or priority for how money should be invested in terms of our, our highway program, transportation program, and music to the ears of, I guess, those of us in the asset management business. Our public really does, when asked, recognize that taking care of what we have, to use Andrew's phrase, is pretty well understood by our stakeholders and constituents out there. A lot of data, a lot of very rich data. Obviously, we don't have time to talk about it in this presentation, but very rich data to be able to parse and evaluate. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about internal engagement. At MnDOT, we have, like I mentioned, recently formed an asset management project office, and our charge is to generally lead initiatives within MnDOT as far as advancing the state of asset management. We also have recently engaged the Stephen Covey organization and have dedicated their process to some of our important initiatives that we are seeking to advance. And they use the vernacular WIG, and it's an acronym for Wildly Important Goal. And it's a process that has a high level of discipline in terms of like weekly commitments to advancing on behalf of literally every employee in the department. And the goal that has been chosen at this point in time is to basically earn trust and increase transparency by really deliberate engagement with our stakeholders. And the reason I put that in there is because, of course, our office participates in it, and it is very consistent with with the goals and the effort of our office in terms of advancing the understanding of asset management, the buy-in, and communications is certainly a very crucial part of being able to build consent for the implementations that we're working on. So I mentioned the part about weekly goals. Each employee really does a commitment every week for an effort above and beyond what our normal job duties to advance this goal. Well, I'll just show a couple of examples on the following slides. So one of the efforts we undertook was with regard to what we call TAMs here. It's our Transportation Asset Management System. About a year and a half ago, we contracted with Agile Assets to replace a Signal and ITS legacy system. That was a very successful implementation, and our team is charged ourselves with really doing some strategic planning for how we will ultimately implement that tool as an enterprise-wide system. And so this, what I'm showing you are just some snapshots of sheets out of the plan, where we were very deliberate about identifying stakeholders, and as we all know, it's a broad group of folks from across an agency when you're talking about an asset management system like this. But I only put it in here as a means of illustrating kind of a formal process and a deliberate thinking through of who the stakeholders are. We held numerous meetings with these various stakeholder groups, and ultimately ended up with, some decisions about staging and phasing and implementation of that management system across the agency. So the document here, I think, functioned both as an informal, it's kind of an informal planning document to document our decisions, and then really as a communications tool as well. So a couple things there. It's the engagement of stakeholders and a means of communicating decisions and directions with them. And then the last slide I have here, I was going to mention, very similar to Andrew's diagram, where we look at, who the stakeholders are and what sorts of messages they need to hear. We too spent a fair amount of time looking at who the various stakeholders are, and again, similar to Andrew, from the assistant commissioners all the way down through frontline employees. We've got a long list of very specific stakeholders and stakeholder groups, and messaging that that we feel they need to see and understand over time. And then again, a listing of tactics. And so what we've got here is basically a matrix of tactics and audience, and then within the cells of the it's just a spreadsheet, the actual messaging that that we want to get to folks. This is really a work in progress. We literally just started it about 2 weeks ago, so we've got a lot more to populate here. But we do think that it will bring maybe a sense of increased rigor, a little more strategic communications effort on our behalf. So that is that's our thinking at this point. I think we're kind of excited about once we spent the time of identifying all the communications need, that this is going to be very helpful to us as a small office here in MnDOT in terms of communications. So I guess we'll let you know in a couple of years if it worked. And that is the last I have in terms of slides. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave, and we invite you back in a couple of years to give us progress on this, all right?
All right.
All right. Our next presentation is from Chad Allen with the Vermont Agency of Transportation, or also known as VTrans. Chad is the Director of the Asset Management and Performance Bureau, or also known as AMP, at Vtrans. So now I'll turn it over to Chad.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to speak to you today about TAM Communications. As you can see on the first slide here, I'm using the new math. Don't get to play around with equations and calculations a whole lot anymore, so I took the liberty to do that here. And really, before we kick off the conversation, our conversation that I want to present to you today, I want you to think about an analogy of how our personal communications can relate to our kind of a much bigger space of communications on a more organizational level. So when we take professional development classes, and we hear a lot about 35% or roughly that thereabouts is related to our verbal communication, what we say. Another 65% is related to those nonverbal communications, what we're showing, the facial expressions or the posturing that's going on, crossed arms or eyes or whatever is happening. And so kind of paralleling that to kind of the online environment, the organizational environment, our strategic plan, our policies, those things that are documents and text that we have online are what we're saying. Those tools and maps and interfaces that we're using to kind of communicate an asset management message are what we're showing the public. And I think if we can kind of move forward thinking about that 65%, that's what I would like to think about. And I think that's why talking about Vtransparency here is how we're engaging our customers around this effort, and that's why it's so important. Moving on to the next slide here, I want to talk a little bit about when we're looking at developing our Vtransparency application, if you want to call it that. We're thinking a lot about a lot of things like who is the customer, what are the needs of the customer, and so we sent out an internal customer survey asking folks who's asking you questions and what kind of questions are they asking you, and then conversely, what questions are you asking of somebody else and what are you asking them? And we're trying to get an idea on kind of a little bit of push-pull of like who's asking what questions, and so how do we structure this so that we can do it in such a way that people can go to this location, get information, get the data they're looking for, maybe with an off chance of reducing that demand on another unit or agency. And so we really wanted to, some of the feedback that we got from some of the survey was like, when are you going to fix my road? What condition, my road's in the worst condition in the state. Who do I contact? Who's the project manager? Who's the resident engineer? Are you closing my bridge this summer? And kind of things that are circulating around asset condition and project management and maintenance activities. So our overarching goal was to provide a combination of services and tools that allow folks to help themselves, essentially sharing data and communicating issues. And this here is our landing site for our Vtransparency webpage. And on this webpage, you can also get information about the travel information on 511. You can report infrastructure deficiencies on our click-to-fix piece. It's an open portal, so you can actually go in and get the data served up to you however you want it, whether you want, if you want a spreadsheet, you want a map, you want a file, a KML file, or KMZ file, you can get that. And so I'm just going to kind of run through this and show you a couple of screenshots from a couple of these applications. The purpose of Vtransparency was to enhance our ability to serve the public, enhance the ability to serve each other. Again, I mentioned reducing the time on complaints and information dissemination, but it was really to make better decisions, inform that planning and programming operations and processes so that we could all be working off the same sheet of music. And this portal is used by internal folks, external folks, RPCs, MPOs, legislatures, pretty much essentially is there for everybody to use. And so here what we're looking at is we're looking at a screenshot of our pavement condition page, and what you can see here is you see a lot of purples and greens that indicate different conditions of our pavement. That was done for folks that might maybe colorblind. That's easier for them to see. But what information we can get off of this is what is the pavement condition where somebody lives, and when was the last time that we went past there with pavement, whether it was a district leveling treatment or a capital improvement project. They can choose the bridge site page where they can get information on the locations of our bridges, whether they're a short or long structure. We have the bridge ID number in there for folks that are interested in that particular asset and asset ID. They can get the bridge inspection report, so our towns can then come to this site, get their bridge inspection reports, and they know to go to this site. So there's a lot less calls coming in saying, can you send me my bridge inspection report? They're just navigated to this location and they can get the bridge inspection report from the latest inspection. It keeps the ad hoc requests for information from trickling down into different organizational layers and diverting productivity of folks. Here is also the project. If you click on project from that Vtransparency site, you come to something that looked like this. This is just zoomed in, and this is from 2015. I didn't update the slide to show what it looks like now, but this is an example of what you would see where you would click in and zoom in on an area. You would see projects that are under construction, what year they'd be under construction. You'd be able to see whether it was a site-specific, like a bridge project or a culvert project, versus a sign project that might be linear in nature, or a paving project. And here we can also see some of the maintenance activities with district leveling that are happening. And so it's kind of provides us that a little bit of that interface between capital improvement projects and maintenance activities. And another thing that we're doing from a communication standpoint is we're holding regional meetings with folks. And in those regional meetings, it's construction staff, maintenance staff, RPCs, MPOs, DMB, state police, utility folks. And it's meant to not only connect people together, email addresses with faces, but it's also meant to encourage folks to communicate and talk about issues. And I don't know if other folks on the line have had the same types of issues, but have you ever cut through fresh asphalt to replace a culvert after you just paved that roadway? Or have you ever paved over fresh stencils or removed the guardrail that was recently repaired by the district? And so, I know that we have, and part of getting to alleviate that communication insanity was to develop some tools and develop some practices that would increase the communication internally, but also with some of our external partners to make better decisions and be proactive on our decision-making process. And so, Vtransparency just breezed you through that quickly, but what you have essentially is a series of views. You can't go into Vtransparency and say, show me all the poor roads in Chittenden County. You can't go in there and say, show me all the good roads and good bridges in Franklin County. And so there are some limitations that Vtransparency was posing for us. And during these regional meetings, we'd have folks raising their hands and saying, I've got an issue with 117 over here. I got a drainage issue. I got a stormwater issue. I got guardrail that's been down for a couple months. We need to get that fixed. And so these regional meetings, we realized the importance of getting out there, talking with the communities, talking with our maintenance staff, identifying those needs, and we place these needs in what we call our quarter needs toolkit, which I'm showing right here. And that's just a way for the districts, the maintenance groups, to get their issues out there. And we see different colored circles representing different things. It could be a slope issue, could be guardrail issue, stormwater issue, poor pavement, potholes, sinking culverts, different things like that. And so we went through kind of an evolution of this. In the first year, we would collect only what came up out of the regional meetings. And then the next year, we said, well, let's get out there ahead of this and talk with the districts and have them tell us where all these issues are. And then pretty soon, they're starting to input this information. And right now, we've got the whole state with all these different needs out there so that our programmers can take that information and our planners can take that information in when they're looking at corridor studies. Our maintenance folks can look at, they're going to know when their projects are coming through, and they know what issues they have out there. Likewise with our construction folks, it just kind of helps enhance that communication of what are the issues, what's happening, how are we going to address these issues together. And so at one of these regional meetings, our chief engineer, Rich Tacho, said, Vtransparency is nice, but it's kind of like a butter knife, because I need a steak knife. And what he was implying by that was, he was saying, I can go and look at pavement condition, but I really can't look at pavement condition and bridge condition at the same time. How do we do that? And that was one of the things when I first came into this position, was asking folks, I don't know how to use GIS, so, if we're looking at this map of functionality and usability, if you know how to use GIS, there's a lot of functionality there. But for somebody like me, it's not that easy to use. We go to something like Vtransparency, I can figure that out. That's got a high rate of use, but the functionality is a little bit limited. So what Mr. Tacho was asking for was that steak knife. He wanted to be able to do a little bit more than what Vtransparency was giving him without having to go through the whole long training process of trying to figure out how to do it all in GIS. And of course, he didn't have the time to do it. And our GIS people wanted to be able to serve that data and information up and communicate that to folks in a way that was meaningful. And so out of that entire effort, it evolved our SK1 project, our Steak Knife 1 project. and that tool is currently under development, and we're anticipating heavy use by our programming staff, like I said before, working towards solving the scheduling of investments in all of our assets. And this is a little bit about what that tool kind of looks like here. It gives us a little bit more granularity in the data. So if you think of like a big pie chart and you're looking at the number of ditching in a maintenance district, you can dive down into the different layers of the data. This tool here will allow us to dive down into different layers. We can look at projects by project stage. We can look at projects over more years than we could in Vtransparency. We'll be able to pull payment data and bridge data together and communicate that to our project managers when they start designing a project to say, look, here's the need, but not only do we want you to pave this section of road, but we want you to improve these culverts and take care of this stormwater issue, and oh, you got a slide over here to repair, because one of those things we'd see out there in the maintenance districts was these projects would come through and they'd pave right by a slide issue, and the project didn't address that at all. There's no communication as to what's happening out there. So this tool here was meant to evolve into that tool that helps us solve some of those communication issues. And so we kind of already covered the focus of the SK1 project. It's bringing in that nexus of maintenance activities, capital projects, asset conditions, all into an area where we can look to make increase our decision making and make sure that we're making wise investments on behalf of the public. And so getting back to this new math here is taking our Vtransparency piece, and that Vtransparency piece I think will have a lot of elements. When we get to developing our canvas, we'll look back at that and say, you know, there's a lot of elements of Vtransparency in here, but as this discussion has evolved across Vtrans with our internal and external stakeholders and the desire to do better and to do more, we've taken Vtransparency, we've evolved that with our new quarter needs toolkit, our SK1 project, and that's all really focused to make sure that we're making that right investment on the right time. And these efforts, I guess, collectively just represent our acknowledgement of our responsibility to be transparent and intentional and accountable for our actions in our communications. And it's part of the messaging that we're doing to assure our customers that we're managing their investments effectively and efficiently. And that concludes my presentation for today.
Thank you, Chad. So before we move on to our next presentation, I just want to remind the audience, if you have a question, if you could enter them into the Q&A feature that's on the menu bar, then we'll be ready to ask them. We'll take them in the order that they're asked on the interface. All right? So our next presentation is from William Johnson of the Colorado DOT. As Performance and Asset Management Branch Manager for CDOT, William manages their asset management process and strategic initiatives. The branch leads CDOT's performance measures and asset management programs by providing tools to effectively measure, analyze, forecast, and communicate to staff and stakeholders the performance of Colorado's transportation programs, processes, and investment decisions. William has over 17 years of experience in the transportation industry, all with CDOT. And now I'll turn it over to William.
Thank you for the introduction, Hiana. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. I am going to fly through some of these introductory slides, and essentially what I'm trying to get to within this presentation is show you where we were before in terms of communication, show you where we're at right now. I'm not necessarily discussing any future things that we have going on, which includes a lot of revamp on our web presence. Just quickly, here's CDOT in a nutshell. More about CDOT. Some interesting things about CDOT is we do actually manage things like buildings, culverts, tunnels, geohazards under our asset management process. We have an organizational strategy that includes 3 peaks focusing on technology in terms of we want to better utilize technology for transportation problems and solutions, people, that's where we're really focused internally on making sure we have a well-equipped staff and system. And under system, you can see asset condition there. So this is in the beginning. We actually started our journey in transportation asset management in around 2011, 2012, and we finished our risk-based asset management plan in December 2013. And what this represented was not just, finishing a plan, because if you're aware of the rules, we're ahead of when those plans were due. What we were doing was changing business. And in doing so, my slides sort of reflect how do we inform things from a business perspective. And one of the things that we did is, well, we talked a lot about the risk-based asset management plan. And in doing so, you can see our table of contents here, what we were trying to hit on. Next is we actually had, I guess one way to describe this is fluffy. What you're seeing here is a handout. It's called Rocking Out with the RVM, and you'll see a couple pages from that. What this was designed to do was just get the word out internally, but also we handed out to our transportation commissioners who are appointed by the governor as well as the legislature. What this was designed to do was to quickly give people a peek into what are we trying to do, what's being affected within the business of transportation, what are the next steps, and why are we doing this. Also, we had a workshop, and this is a staff level workshop with over 500 of my closest friends. At this workshop, we had our executive director, our chief engineer, other executive managers talking about here's asset management, here's what's going to change. Now for us, again, going back to we were changing business, this was important to communicate as a whole. So those 500 people included multiple stakeholders internally within CDOT that had asset management components within their work. And we gave them an opportunity to here's what our 11 asset programs are doing, as well as be able to, you could see me at the bottom left-hand corner, ask me as well as our executive management questions. And it was very candid, and a lot of questions regarding what's changing, what do you want me to do, how does it affect me. We also posted those things up on YouTube. Now, going into what are we currently doing, I have this broken down by 3 stakeholder groups covering 3 topics. And I'm just going to run over some examples of things that we're doing right now that are working pretty effectively. And so you'll see that the stakeholder groups I have here include internal staff, which by extension includes our executive management, our transportation commission, the public, and that's just general overarching public, as well as our legislature. The 3 topics we're going to cover in this is how do we communicate performance, how do we communicate process, and how do we communicate funding. All these things are related in terms of what is it that we're trying to communicate in terms of changing or affecting the business of transportation asset management. So I'll start here. This is one of the keystone things that we have in terms of communicating internally our performance. This is a list of our asset management programs and their associated performance metrics, as well as what is the target that they're trying to achieve. We typically show this with the current condition. We're in the process of updating that, so apologies for that. But for us, what this reflects in a broader sense is what is our investment strategy? What are we trying to do as an organization? Next, we see a piece of information here that's used internally. What this information is it's just your basic standard performance curves, but if you look closer, you'll see multiple scenarios at this. What we're communicating here is with this investment dollar amount, you'll achieve this performance across this time horizon. And in doing so, we use this information for actual investment decisions. I'll be using similar information like this next week in our FY21 budget setting process. So you can see both the importance of just having those scenarios for budget, but budgets across time. I'm always working 4 years out in the future. The next thing is, and this goes deeper into affecting business, this is a snapshot of what we call our L2 report. L2 stands for lag and lead. It's built off of the 4 disciplines of execution by Covey. And in that 4 disciplines of execution, it asks you to identify your wildly important goals as well as those lead and lag metrics associated with getting to your wildly important goals. Now, every other month, what we do is we report on infrastructure condition, both the lag and lead metrics, to ensure that we're able to demonstrate our wildly important goals. Those wildly important goals, just so you know, will be aligned with our goals for things like bridge and pavement to FHWA, the national performance metrics. But more so, in looking at this, what we're trying to communicate is how well are we doing in some of these process-related areas in order to achieve those national performance targets. An example, and we're changing over here to public, is we don't show them that much detail. And instead, what we typically use is infographics. This one that you see here is discussing a change in performance metrics that we have in surface treatment, where we went from a remaining service life performance metric to a drivability life. And what we try to use is a lot less words and a lot more pictures to communicate what that change is. Also, this is what I'll call the keeping up with the Joneses scale. And what we're trying to do here is show where Colorado is compared to all other states. Now, the keeping up with the Joneses is you're looking at your neighbor, you see that your neighbor's doing better, you want to do better. That's what we're trying to explain to the public here, is that Colorado, we have some shortfalls in terms of our ability to meet certain performance targets, of which you can see pavement and bridge condition in it. And we want to explain to them that we're not doing too well compared to our neighbors. Our legislature, and y'all have a couple slides on our legislature, we send them a little bit more information, but it's different than the kind we use for decision making. This is more of an explanatory piece of communication where we're trying to show them what the difference is in terms of what you see out in the road versus what our data tells us, so that when we say we have low drivability on performance, you got to picture some alligator cracking as well as a sort of geometric cross section to show how deep that crack is, as well as with culverts. You can see actual collapsed culverts that represent a poor culvert, because they're the ones asking questions about what we're doing with our funding. They don't necessarily have control over it, but they have great influence into it, and so we want to be able to appropriately explain why we're making the decisions that we're making. Also, this is a snapshot from our transportation deficit report. Again, much more detail than we would send to the public, but on a different level than we would use for internal decision making. What these two slides represent is pavement and bridge. And what it shows is, over time, here's how much money we have to put towards these assets in attaining multiple target levels. We show it on a sustain, that is, what is it now and how much will it take for us to keep it there over 10 years. What is our actual target and how much will it take for us to get to that target. And in doing so, we will actually show a deficit or a surplus of funding. This one is interesting. When you see the blue bars on the bottom left-hand side of the slide, that's our payment. We consistently show a deficit in the amount of funds for us to be able to both sustain as well as achieve our performance targets. If you contrast that with bridge, based off of the one performance target that we actually do performance curves on, we initially show a surplus, and that's because we're exceeding our performance target. Always within the transportation deficit report, we have another page on it that explains, hey, although our bridge condition for deck is doing well, we have these other performance metrics that we're investing in also that contribute towards that bridge performing well. The last thing in terms of explaining performance to the legislature, they're always coming up with a bond bill. And that bond bill, as with all bonds, hedges upon using our current revenue to pay back that bond. What we consistently have been doing, or consistent for the past 4 years, been doing is showing them that money comes from somewhere. Our current strategy is it comes from asset management. And if you take away revenue that we use to put towards asset investments, this is what is going to happen to the performance. Next, I'm going to move on to process. And this is the what's in it for me in terms of the internal perspective. what we found is that, yeah, it was great for us to all get together in a workshop and hear from our executive manager what the big vision is, but now what are you asking me to do? And that's where we're explaining our process much more thoroughly. Although I purposely made this slide so you can't really see what we're doing, the reality is that we are able to expand on those slides, and currently we're writing explanation about what those roles and responsibilities are for each one of those stakeholder groups that are in the swim lanes, as well as the diamonds, which are decision-making points. We want people to understand internally who's making decisions, when in the process those decisions are being made, what information is used within those decisions, and what's the end result of those decisions. When it comes to the public, much different. Going back to less words, less information, we wanted to generalize. Here's what the traditional asset management process includes. We set our goals and objectives, we identify risk, we mitigate, we prioritize, that's the project selection and prioritize, and then we do inspections, and it's all in a continuum. Now for the legislature, they're really curious about a couple of things. How much money do you have and what are you doing with it? So for them, we go into a little bit more detail. This is where you're starting to replicate some of the information we use for internal decision making, but still keeping it at a high level. Here you can see what data is being driven, or sorry, what data is driving the analysis into the decision. And you can see all of our assets that are in our asset investment management system. That's the system that we use for performance curves. And you could see what the performance scenarios are. This is our forecast, and then you could see what our budget is. And that's flowing from, we use some data to do some analysis to come up with an allocation for 11 different asset classes. But also, they want to know, what are we getting out of this? What's happening in my backyard? What are you putting your money to? So initially, we had developed this map. The link is below. It is an externally facing link for internal use, but we found that it was very useful when we spoke to our legislature when they were asking, I don't see where CDOT projects are occurring. Show me where that money is going to. They are very regionally focused in terms of what their job is, and they want to be able to explain to their constituents what it is we're doing, how we're spending that money. I'm going to switch topics one more time. This is the last one dealing with funding. And you can see here on the left, I've already shown you this slide. This is our planning budgets. It goes out to FY20. We'll be doing an FY21 soon. People want to know what asset is getting what amount of money. We do actually break this down further for our 5 different engineering regions so they could begin to plan. Again, working off of 4 years out in the future, they could start working with that money immediately with a cash management strategy. But also compare that to the right, in which we show the estimated average yearly need to reach our targets. So this is explaining, here is our shortfall. In Colorado, we've been experiencing a huge amount of growth in terms of population. I want to say that in 2015, 2016, just in the Denver metro area alone, we added 100,000 more people. And what our regions are faced with is congestion. People want to know, why aren't we doing things about congestion? The sad reality is we don't have enough money to do everything. And our focus is on maintaining what we have. This piece of information here, the planning budget versus the need to achieve targets, has become integral in terms of communicating the message internally to staff of why can't we build more capacity projects? And it shows really clearly here, well, we have some shortfalls. We can't achieve all our performance targets. Our existing road is falling apart. We have a shortfall of roughly $200 million every year in asset management. We have to close that first before we start thinking about building other things.
Hey, William, 2 minutes, okay?
Yeah, we'll do. Next is the public funding. Again, here we just show it, large letters. There's a shortfall in funding. And again, here's what we're spending our money on. When it comes to the legislature, again, we get into a little bit more detail. While they don't necessarily have influence on this, using a public-friendly budget, we're able to categorize things for them to understand how we use our funding. And that's it, Yana.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay.
You came in just a second too early.
All right. Thank you, William. So, our final presentation today is from John Thomas of the Utah Department of Transportation. John is the Asset Management Director at UDOT. Currently, UDOT is working towards a cross-asset model that, if successful, will provide UDOT insight into how different assets perform with various funding scenarios. Now I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, and hello everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. All right, what I'd like to start with is the Federal Highways TPM Toolbox, and the reason for that is UDOT has found significant value out of utilizing this. The guidebook has some frameworks and ideas about how we've organized our asset management and how we report it, and you can see the goals, objectives, performance measures. This area has been very useful to us, so I'd like to recommend that for people to go to. I think it provides a lot of good information, and it's demonstrated here in this presentation in that when we look at how UDOT is organized with a mission statement, our vision, our strategic goals, the way we manage our assets also are related to that. So here with our zero fatalities goal, we have different strategies to employ that. We communicate our trend lines, look at what some of the future might look like. We look at our preserve infrastructure goal. Again, we try to talk about strategies for our customers and others that want to understand our principles in preserving our infrastructure. We provide some other information around our maps, and then how the condition of that is. How are we managing that asset? And here is just some simple red, yellow, green bar graphs demonstrating performance, and we try to keep that in a fairly consistent manner for our different systems so people can understand that. We do that with our bridges and continue to just try to organize the information in a way that people can understand it readily. And as we continue working with this information, we use other tools. Here's some of that same information, different measures. Here's the pavement, red, yellow, green graphs with different targets. This information's in here. This is live from our data sets, so that as that information's reported, it's updated into this tool. And then it's rolled up into a table that allows us to identify some dials and some dashboards about how is the department doing in spending taxpayer dollars. And our executive leadership team is very focused on being transparent to the public, and this helps to communicate when the public entrusts UDOT with money, this is how we're managing it, and this is the results we're getting from that. And when we get into these types of technologies, it allows us to start to be a little more flexible in how we can apply it. We can take the same information, put it into the department's strategic direction, and start to communicate it again in different ways. This is right on our website. People can go to it. They can come to these different pages, look at the information, and here's that same number from the previous tool that we were looking at. You can see how those weights that were in that table, how we're doing against the different criteria, and it gives you a sense of how UDOT is performing to our goals in safety, and we have the same for preservation and mobility. But this gives you an idea of how we're trying to organize our information and report it in a way that is helpful for the public, trying to be transparent. And these, again, are the same graphs we saw in that other tool. So what we're finding is in communicating our asset management outcomes, that the technologies are coming along in a way that we can now start to use a variety of different tools to communicate the same information or in a different way. And another tool, we're addressing our statewide transportation improvement program. There's 781 projects here that have been prioritized based in part on different criteria, again going back to our strategic goals, and then different groups of participants weight these and provide input as to what these weights are that then helps rank each of these projects. And one of the things that we think is interesting in being transparent with this is others can have input on what these goals are. What if somebody thought, well, we need to add more weight towards congestion projects? What would that do? And then these tools allow us to resort them, show on the fly how this works. And you can see how that works. This project went down to, this one came up 266 based on this new weighting criteria. From there, we can take that same information, start to look at it in more of a external focused environment where people can look at this and say, okay, given a budget that we have and the different assets that we're managing, what are we getting for it? How are they responding to our different targets? And the tools are now allowing us to, again, say, well, what if we came down and we wanted to add more money to pavement? And we added more money to pavement, what would that do? And you can see how the dials move on this one. Or if you wanted to spend less on structures, what would that outcome be? And this type of tool allows us to be much more transparent, have immediate dialogue around the results of managing these assets, and being able to communicate it in ways that we haven't been able to in the past. And I think that's been a prime strategy of UDOT's executive leadership, is to find ways that are meaningful and accessible for people to understand what are they getting for their dollar at UDOT. And these are the types of tools that help us communicate that. Just somewhat of a footnote, these are all, the ones I'm showing you we're pretty much in draft on all these, but we are continuing to develop them and pretty excited about the direction of these. So that's what we're doing at UDOT, and that's all I have for today.
All right. Thank you, John. So that concludes our presentations for today. Thank you to all of our presenters. And now it's time for Q&A. So if people have questions, please enter them. But I'm going to start with a question for all of our panelists. You've all presented various aspects of a communication program that's applied to your TAM programs. And if you could each just share with the group, out of all the things that you're doing, what stands out for you as being the most either important ingredient or impactful, and you can address both. So both, what is it in terms of all the pieces you're working on is most important to make the program work, and then out of the things you're doing, which do you feel is the most impactful in being successful in your TAM program? So Andrew is, I think, not with us anymore, so let us, he had to go on to another meeting. So let's go to, who is our second, Dave Solstrud from MnDOT.
Okay. Yeah, I guess where we are in terms of our evolution into asset management, I think probably one of the biggest things we face is getting our investment decisions to really align with asset management practices, and probably is in part an understanding by maybe even our districts, on one hand, an understanding of some of the best practices and management strategies, but then also there's that financial component, and a challenge for us is trying to meet our targets, which are, for pavement at least primarily poor, centered around poor measures, which is difficult to share your money between, meeting the most visible poor targets and doing what we need to in terms of preventive. So I think for us it'll be a lot about outreach to our district personnel, and like I mentioned, we're just we're really starting that particular part of the journey. So strategies that we can find that will really help advance that understanding. It's probably going to be a lot of the internal means of internal communication, and as much as we can, probably face to face and in person. So that's I guess what strikes me as in response to your question, Hannah.
Thanks, Dave. How about you, Chad?
I guess maybe a couple things stick out. One is the adage of communicating early and often. I think that's important. I also think it was important, I think one of the presenters said this, which was you need to establish communication strategies for different levels of engagement. Your legislatures you're gonna give them a different message than what you give the general public. You're gonna give the general public a different message than you're going to provide to internal staff, and so on and so forth. So I think those are the two things that I would say are keys to success for us.
Thanks, Chad. How about you, William?
Yeah, I'd say just from a selfish perspective, the most important things that we've been able to communicate is the process, and that deals with roles and responsibilities. Everybody wants to know where they fit in the process, but the important thing is being able to communicate it out to people in a consistent manner, and that consistency is really what keeps the program sort of the oil greasing the wheels there.
Thanks, William. How about you, John?
I think a lot of it is around organizing the information that we have. As we all know, we have a lot of technical information, and a lot of our external stakeholders have a hard time understanding all that, and having the ability to organize it in a way that tools can help us communicate the outcomes of different scenarios, I think provides a forum for the discussion to be pretty productive. And we're beginning that process, and seeing some pretty good results from that as we've already started that.
Thanks, John. So there's a question for Chad, and it's, what was the evolution like for having the ability to map stated corridor needs into the toolkit? You said early on in your office that your office facilitated and consolidated the stated needs. Does that mean you had to investigate and validate the problem locations, or did maintenance staff validate this information? I understood the regional meeting was more to boost communication, but the regions kept it going and took it over, so it became part of the budgeting or staffing decision making.
Yeah, so I would say the very first regional meeting we had, we realized that we're working off of paper maps, and that just wasn't very effective at all. And so the Vtransparency tool, if you want to call it that, was generated to help give us a platform which we could drive each of these routes and say, okay, well, this is what's coming in this area. This is the paving project. This is the bridge project. And then we just started organically, coming up with, hey, we've got this issue here and this issue there, and we used our collector app that we have with our Esri GIS tools, and we just had a couple people come to the next year's regional meeting and just started inputting these needs on the map. And so it's folks in the room could see that their issue was being documented because they could see that dot come up on the map. as soon as it was entered and after it was discussed about. And so it evolved from that into the next year. We had a series of pre-meetings with each of the districts before the regional meetings, and we engaged their staff, maybe 2-3 hour long meeting to get them started on, this is what we need to do, this is what we're looking for, here's how you enter your needs into the map, and they just kind of took off and ran with that. This past year, what we did is we said, this is all part of our corridor management and gearing up for that and towards that. We spent probably $500,000 on looking at a corridor about 7 miles long, looking at all the needs along that corridor and assigning resources to these needs and fixing those needs in advance of a paving project. And so I think it was definitely an evolution. Our districts definitely took that and ran with that to their credit, and we showed them that we're listening and we're using some of that material and showed them what we're planning on doing with it in the future.
Thanks, Chad. One final question to all of you. If you look to the future and are thinking about something you'd like to have that would help you communicate better, I think we all agree that we don't do enough communication and that we want to do it better. And many of you presented things that you're initiating and you're going to have more experience with as we go forward. But if there were something available to you that was produced at a national level through the cooperative research, or maybe it's a product that the private sector could provide or federal highways, what is it that you would suggest is a communication-related resource you'd like to have? Who wants to volunteer?
I'll start. Go ahead.
Well, this is Dave Soldier again. I think I just love seeing the exhibits. Like Ohio has the video clip, we've seen that before, and the various different, to me it'd be really neat if we just had a kind of a library of, graphic ideas that we could page through and inspire some thoughts from it.
So when you look at the slides, there is that for the performance management. So it may be something that we should suggest to Matt at AASHTO to add to the transportation asset management. But yes, I've heard that many times from people, the ability to just share better. Who else had a thought?
I'll take a shot at it, John. I think one of the things that would really benefit us would be something more of a software tool that was available to us that already had the framework for the federal performance measures that allowed us to spend more of our time figuring out on our end how do we respond to that versus trying to figure out not only on our end but also what does that tool look like for reporting federal performance measures, and then how would we incorporate that with our own performance measures that might be different. And so maybe some more help and guidance from a national level as to what does that format look like, and so we can spend more of our time doing what we do perhaps a little more efficiently.
John, do you mean also let's take the pavement and bridge measures in map 21, that there's a resource where you take the information that you're providing for your reporting, but that there's a tool that automatically generates very good visuals that you can use with your customers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Great idea. Anybody else?
John actually took part of what I was going to say. Thanks a lot, John.
Hey, I knew you were going to say it, so that's why I was volunteering.
But
You guys are neighbors, so you think alike.
Yeah.
let me expand on that a little bit because I'm interested in digging into the details. And I've tried to look at other states' data in terms of just like looking at HPMS data. And although it's required that we all report it the same, we are unable as states to look at it the same way that FHWA does. And just looking at it from our end, if I pull like Arizona or Utah's data, I can't make rhyme or reason behind it. And going with what John said, the reason why I want to look at those things, I want to look at Washington, I want to look at Utah, I want to look at Idaho to see what are the treatments that they're putting down on the ground in order to achieve this performance, and start to dredge out, are there some best practices within both the data elements that they have as well as their investment strategy and treatments. And I can only do that if I'm able to view their information in a consistent way.
Great idea. There is, there's a piece of that that's available through the NCHRP 2024-37 series, and there were studies done on the bridge condition and 2 different pavement conditions, and it had the element that you're seeking, but I'm sure you want a deeper study, but it did unify all of the measures, so everyone had to provide the data in a consistent manner. And you're right, even on the IRI, where we thought it was going to be very simple, it turned out that people had to provide their data, not just their HPMS data as submitted, but in a way so that there was more consistency. And then there was a exploration of what were the states that had the highest performance, what is it that they did that provided that. And then there's a new NCHRP project that came out of the Scopum research agenda and it's 08-118 that just is kicking off, that's continuing the comparative performance, but also trying to build a repository that will be hosted by AASHTO, kind of looking at benchmarking as a science and as a sustainable program that the states can all contribute to. So keep your eyes on that. All right, I think we are at the end of our webinar today, and our next webinar will be held on May 10th at 2 p.m. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the first in a 4-part series addressing elements of a transportation asset management plan. And the first one will be on asset inventory condition, target setting, and 10-year projections. So I hope you'll be able to join us, and we'll be doing these every other month. And you'll soon see on the TAM portal the advertisement for the next 4. So look forward to seeing you on May 10th. Thank you to all of our presenters. This was a fantastic webinar, and you all were amazing at sticking to the schedule. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.